Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, we turn our attention to the Minnesota Vikings Week 14 action at Allegiant Stadium. It's Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, December 7th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. Of course, as always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate you and my man Ari. Ari does a great job each and every day getting us up on YouTube, making us look good, make us sound good. We appreciate him. You can hit him up on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. Normally we have those calls and texts. We won't have them today. It is Crossover Thursday. That's when the host of the next team up on the schedule for the Silver and Black will join the show, and we'll break it all the way down. So Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings, will join the show. We'll talk storylines, we'll talk matchups, and what is it going to take for each team to get the victory. That's coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do have news and notes of the day. I just have a couple little roster moves that I want to update you on. But before I do any of that, I definitely want to make sure to send my love, thoughts, and prayers out to the families of the victims of the folks that were affected by the shooting at UNLV that took place on Wednesday here in Las Vegas. It was a really sad, emotional, tough day for anyone in or around the UNLV area and the Las Vegas community. Just a senseless act of violence. It should not happen. We shouldn't have to worry about our kids and children going to school and wondering if they're going to come home. Like, no parent should ever have to worry about that. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in, and it happens too many times, and we're actually really too numb to it, and that's a scary thought as well. The Raiders put out a statement talking about the shooting at UNLV. They said the Raiders are deeply saddened by the tragic events that occurred at UNLV. Our hearts go out to the victims, their families, and all those affected by this senseless act of violence. We're committed to helping our friends at UNLV and the greater Las Vegas community heal, and are grateful for the efforts of our first responders. And yeah, that's the last thing I'll say on what's going on in the Las Vegas community. But yes, shout out to the first responders that were very well trained and prepared for a situation like this, as they've had experience going all the way back to the 1 October event that happened here, another senseless act of violence. But they did a great job making sure that the lives that were lost, and one is too many, but the lives that are lost was at a very minimal. And they made sure that they had everything under control, where they knew exactly what to do, what roads to lock down, what hospitals to lock down, to make sure that they were able to do whatever they had to do to save as many lives as possible. And I thought that they did a hell of a job. So shout out to all the first responders who do not get enough love for the job that they do. It's the toughest job out there. Police officers, first responders, I say it all the time. They put their lives on the line each and every day, and I don't think we appreciate them enough. So I definitely want to just share my thoughts and prayers out to all the families affected by the shooting at UNLV. Now, I did want to get into a quick roster move, or a couple quick roster moves that the Raiders made on Wednesday. The first one was Brandon Faison. They actually put out a statement saying that they've designated for return Brandon Faison from the reserve injured list. He's a guy that was injured back in training camp. He's a cornerback that they expected a lot from. He's big. He's got that physicality, and he got injured in training camp and has not been available at all season. Myself and Vinny Bonsignore have asked about Brandon Faison multiple times in media sessions, and getting closer. Ask Brandon. That was actually something that former GM Dave Ziegler, told Vinny Bonsignore and myself one time. Well, go ahead and ask Brandon when he's ready to come back. So I didn't know what that really meant, but on Wednesday, the Raiders designated for return from the reserved injured list one cornerback, Brandon Faison. They also did the same thing for linebacker Kanai Maiaga. They designated him for return from the reserved injured list as well. So a couple of guys sound like they're getting a little bit healthier. The Raiders now have 21 days. The window is open to add those guys to the active roster. So those are the only roster moves that I have for today. The injury report came out from Wednesday for the Raiders. Max Crosby and Colton Miller both were not participants at practice, and especially with Max Crosby and that knee, and we know the severity of it, or at least we believe we know the severity of it. We'll have to see and monitor the injury report to see if he gets to practice today, if he practices on Friday, if he stays designated as did not participate. I would not be shocked to see him miss some time sooner rather than later if it's not as early as this week, but we'll continue to update you on that. Now let's go ahead and jump into the crossover edition. Before we do that, I do want to let you know it's being brought to you today by PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Now, without further ado, let's get into part one of the crossover edition with Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings, where we talk all things storylines between the Vikings and the Raiders.
Welcome in, Vikings fans. Welcome in, Raiders fans, to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Luke Braun. I do Locked On Vikings here with your boy Q, who does Locked On Raiders. Q, what is up, my dude?
Man, it is another crossover Thursday. It's another game. Week 14 already? I remember when it was week 1. Now it's week 14. Here we are.
I know. And things are different.
Right. A lot of things have changed for, I think, both teams along the way. But here we are.
Yeah. And this is kind of fun because the last time that you and I crossed over was 2019. It was my first full year at the network.
Okay.
And now, like, here we are. Look at how far we've all come.
Right. Right.
Pretty
yeah. What is
sick.
it, 2023? I don't even know what year it is.
Man.
2023. Man, that time flew by. 2019, huh? Wow.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Back then, it was Derek Carr. That was like a big Dalvin Cook game.
Yeah.
Well, no Dalvin Cook and no Kirk Cousins for this one. Obviously, he's been hurt. So the Vikings just announced, if anybody's curious, if any Raiders fans didn't catch it, they announced that they will continue onward with Joshua Dobbs. He is the quarterback moving forward, and that probably means he's the quarterback for the rest of the year. If the Monday night debacle couldn't unseat him that the Vikings had before the bye against the Bears, probably nothing will. But that means that it's Dobbs versus Aiden O'Connell. So I figure that's the biggest deal here is he good? Is O'Connell a good quarterback? Like I liked him coming out for potential, but he seems so raw. It seems like he's really outplaying what I thought I was seeing when I watched him it was Purdue, right?
Yeah, what he is right now is, and that's a great question, is he good? I think that's the question that the Raiders are still trying to figure out as well, right? And that's not a disrespect to him. It's just they're trying to figure out, is he good? You know, who exactly is he? And he's had a handful of games now where he's been the starter ever since Antonio Pierce has taken over as the interim head coach. He announced him as the starter that day, and he's been that guy ever since November 1st. So he's had multiple opportunities, and he's been good at moments. There's times I'm sitting in the press box, and I'll see a pass. I'm like, wow, that was an awesome pass. And then there's other times that scratch my head and say, well, what was that? So I think right now for Aiden O'Connell, it's an incomplete as far as his grade, and it's just because it's inconsistent. He just hasn't been consistent yet. You see the arm talent, and you know that he's got it between his ears. Can he do it consistently is probably the biggest question. I think over the course of the next 5 weeks, starting this Sunday versus Minnesota, will start to help the Raiders figure that out, and that's the question that they have to answer by the end of the year.
Well, I can guarantee you this. The Raiders have not seen a defense like the Vikings defense, and they will not see one like it again this year. The Vikings are doing something nobody else is doing, and it is predicated on a ton of blitzing.
Yeah.
So my question in all of these crossovers has been, how does Aiden O'Connell handle the blitz and the Raiders offense in general? Like, what's their go-to move? Is that consistent? Do they try to still push the ball downfield and take sacks? Do they decide to, turtle into a bunch of checkdowns? Do they bring more guys into protection? What's their move?
Well, the thing is they want him to get the ball out of his hands really quickly. He actually stretches the field a little bit where when Jimmy G was the guy, that never happened. And he would get the ball out of his hands really quickly as well. I'm interested to see how they're going to handle this blitz because they haven't dealt with a team that's going to be blitzing like Minnesota does, right? I mean, Brian Flores just came in and changed the game, obviously, for the Minnesota Vikings on their defensive side of things. So I'm interested to see how he deals with it because, honestly, he holds on to the ball too much as it is. I mean, his first career start was week 4 actually against the Chargers, and Khalil Mack had 6 sacks on him. The Chargers as a team had 7, but that was him very raw. He has matured since then, but you still see times when he holds onto the ball too long. So he's got to figure out that, hey, I cannot do that. And especially with Danielle Hunter and company, and of course that blitz coming after him, he's going to have to get that ball out of his hands. I'm thinking that the slants are going to be some go-to moves. but I still haven't seen that consistently either. So that's why I really don't have a great answer of what the go-to move is. I'm not sure the Raiders have a go-to move yet, which is
It's like, hasn't been tested in this way.
14,
So
right?
this will become the test then. Yeah.
Right.
And this is what the Vikings have been for a lot of teams. It's like a stress test of your blitz answers.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
what
like
is that package? How robust is it?
right. You're like a bar rescue. It's a stress test, right? To see how you
Yeah,
can do.
exactly.
I like that. But yeah, that's going to be the big question, man. It's like, what do you do? How do you combat that? Can you get the ball to your playmakers' hands? The thing about it, I can say this: they have the playmakers to deal with it, right? They have Devontae Adams, they have Jacoby Myers, they have Hunter Renfrow, they have guys that could deal with it. Can he get the ball to them consistently is going to be the question. And how does the offensive line hold up? Again, the blitz is designed to get home. So how can the offensive line hold up? Can they give him at least a couple of seconds to get that ball out of his hand? It's going to be a big question mark for this offensive line. And it's dealing with some injuries, right? I mean, Colton Miller hasn't quite been Colton Miller for a while. He missed a couple of games. On Wednesday, he didn't participate in practice. I'm assuming that he's going to play. He played in the last game before the bye week, but if he's not out there, then all of a sudden you have Jermaine Illuminor as the left tackle, and that could be problematic as well.
Yeah, and as much as the Vikings want to get free rushers, they like to get their one-on-ones as well. Just stick Danielle Hunter over there all day and see what happens.
Right.
So what are Raiders fans looking at the Vikings and wondering going into this game?
That's the thing. Like, and that's really where I want to, come in and talk about Josh Dobbs. And I know that he's been good. I want to say he hasn't been great, but but the situations he's been put in has been different. But for me, it's the turnovers and all the turnovers that he's had. Why is it that he's turning the ball over at such an alarming rate, and not even just interceptions, but fumbles as well?
Some of that is Josh Dobbs. Some of that is just the Vikings infecting him. I don't know. The Vikings and turnovers have been the story of the season.
Yeah.
They have been catastrophic in turnovers. I think they are 17-4 in giveaway ratio, 17 giveaways to 4 takeaways in losses this year. It's horrible.
Wow. Yeah.
And a lot of those losses have been close games, 1-2 points. So you can kind of look and say, if they protect the ball, they will win. And that has been the thing all year. But Josh Dobbs doesn't protect the ball very well. When he misses high. That can turn into interceptions. He's had a couple interceptions where he's just been under pressure trying to flick the ball to a running back or get rid of the ball so he doesn't take a sack into an ill-advised throwing window, ends up being right into the deep. He's thrown multiple interceptions to nose tackles this year.
Wow.
And he's only played 4 games for the Vikings.
Wow.
So he will have these just total brain fart, meltdown moments, or just forcing things that he doesn't necessarily need to force. He's just not very safe with the football as a quarterback. And the fumbles, not unlike a lot of the stuff you said about Aiden O'Connell, I would say about Josh Dobbs as well. It's been inconsistency. First half against the Saints a few weeks ago, he looked like he could go toe-to-toe with just about anybody in the league. He was slicing and dicing, playing beautiful quarterback.
Right.
But if you look at the game against the Bears, completely unacceptable, to the point where the Vikings genuinely sat down all bye week and said, are we going to bench this guy? They decided no, but they really gave it a strong consideration.
Right.
So it's consistency for sure. It's holding the ball too long. Definitely still a thing for the Vikings. So it'll be a thing on both sides of the ball. I would take the over on sacks here.
Right.
And you can sort of attack that in a certain way. Things just go too slow. It's timing and rhythm not necessarily being there. Kevin O'Connell did say that they sat down, they watched the tape from the Monday night debacle against Chicago. They feel like they've fixed those issues, but obviously that's it remains to be seen just how good of a fix that is, right? It's really easy to say you feel good about it because you watch some tape. But there was something that you mentioned that I want to get into with Danielle Hunter against possibly a backup tackle, although that might be DJ Wanham as well over on that side. They usually have Danielle Hunter on the other side. But on the other side of the ball, we haven't talked about Max Crosby at all yet. And I want to talk about how he matches up with the Vikings tackles and whatever matchup stuff you want to talk about as well. I'm sure that we'll have to get into Devontae Adams and the glorious triumphant return of Justin Jefferson after 2 months being out.
Yeah.
He will be back for this game. So all of that talk is coming up.
So there's part one of the crossover edition, talking storyline, what we believe the biggest storylines are between the Vikings and the Raiders. Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings, and myself. Coming up in segment number 2, we're going to talk about the matchups. Where do we think the biggest matchups will come from? We'll talk about that after I tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals with a B, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is quick and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and even quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into the part 2 of the crossover edition with Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings. We've already talked about the biggest storylines. Now it's time to jump into the biggest matchups when it comes to the Vikings and the Raiders. Here's part 2 of the crossover edition.
Moving on with this crossover Thursday on the Locked On NFL podcast network, brought to you by PrizePicks. I am Luke Braun. I do Locked On Vikings here with your boy Q, does Locked On Raiders. Why don't you kick off this matchup segment and tell me what is the matchup you are most looking forward to?
I think it's got to be the return of Justin Jefferson, right? I mean, you teased it in segment number 1. I think that's what I'm most intrigued to see what it looks like. We know how dynamic of a wide receiver Justin Jefferson is, one of the best in the league, and many could say he's the best in the league, and I don't think you're going to get arguments, right? So I just want to see what it looks like when he returns and see how the Raiders secondary holds up. Marcus Peters was waived prior to the bye week after his game against the Kansas City Chiefs, week 12 action. Week 12 action. He was released, and so you got Jack Jones, who the Raiders just picked up off of waivers from the Patriots right before that Kansas City Chiefs game. You have him. You have Amik Robertson. He's a smaller guy, right? So are they going to match up?
I loved him coming out.
Oh, Amik Robertson is fantastic, man. I love just the fight that he has in him. He's great, but he's definitely a smaller dude. And if he's lined up against Justin Jefferson's going to have a smile on his face. Whether Amik makes plays or not, Justin Jefferson is going to say, okay, here we go. This is a great welcome back to action moment right here. So that might mean like a guy like Nate Hobbs, who's normally in the slot. Maybe he kicks outside and he goes and matches up with Justin Jefferson. That's what I really want to see. Patrick Graham and this Raiders defense has been good this year. It's been a lot better than it's been in many years. So they've held this team close, and they've kept them in games, and they've given them opportunities to win. Now, they haven't won all those games, but they've kept them in opportunities to win those games. So I want to see what it looks like, that secondary against Justin Jefferson. Can they hold up? And on top of that, Justin Jefferson's first game back, his first bit of action, like you mentioned, a couple months, what does he look like? I mean, it's one thing to get back on the practice field. It's another thing for game action. So I'm interested to see what he looks like as well. And, I'm sure that Vikings fans, and I'm sure you're excited as well to see what Justin Jefferson looks like in his return.
It's a much needed hit of nitro that this offense that is completely skidded to a halt in the last 2 games. They're definitely going to need that playmaker ability. I think piecing things together with like Brandon Powell and Johnny Munt can only take you so far in so many games before teams figure out that they got better dudes. I'm really interested in that. I'm interested to see if Amik Robinson ends up on Jordan Addison, who is our smaller receiver, but he's a big deep threat as well. Right. And what the Raiders do with TJ Hawkinson and all of the different weapons. I will say that the Vikings have been very cautious with Justin Jefferson in a more urgent setting. I guess is what I'll say. He might've come back 2 weeks ago. He was really close to playing against the Bears. He was really close to playing against the Saints and the Broncos. I mean, he was really close that whole time. So he is, I don't think, going to be rusty necessarily. Like, he has been practicing and participating and being part of the week to week flow of things for a month now. And they've just been really, really cautious about whether or not he goes into games. But I want to flip it around on you and talk about your stud receiver, which is Devontae Adams. We know him very well from years and years in Green Bay.
Right.
In Green Bay, especially in the last couple of years in Green Bay, he was a manufactured touches kind of guy. He was an after catch, give him a bubble screen, and he's going to break a tackle kind of guy. And then they would send him deep every once in a while as well. And so he was this like kind of featured weapon in the Green Bay offense where they were making plays designed to get Devontae Adams the ball because he's the guy that makes this thing go. Are the Raiders doing it similarly with him? Are they doing a lot of short stuff, or like what's the plan there? And then I can tell you who he'll probably end up doing that stuff against.
Well, I'll tell you right now, again, like everything else when it comes to the Raiders offense, has been very inconsistent with Devontae. There's times where he gets the ball force-fed to him, and then there's times where you don't even know if 17's on the field. Not because of him, because they're not getting the ball to him, which is really bizarre. The last game he played was against Kansas City, Week 12, before the Raiders went into the bye. He had 5 catches for 73 yards early in the game, like the first quarter. He ended the game with 5 catches for 73 yards, right? I mean, it blows my mind how they consistently can't get the ball to their playmaker. And then there's times, I can go all the way back to the Bears game, where that's all they try to do. Brian Hoyer was a quarterback, and they're like, okay, Devontae wants the ball. We're going to give him the ball 20 times. He's going to get 20 targets. And that's not healthy, right? You've got to have a middle even. You've got to get the playmakers the ball because they're the playmakers, especially him. But at the same time, you can't just zoom in and lock in on one target. You've got to be able to, look around the field, especially with the weapons that the Raiders have, and they don't do it. So last game, Jacoby Myers had a good game. He actually got into the end zone, scored a touchdown. And like I said, Devontae started out hot, and then all of a sudden they went away from him. And I've asked him in the locker room afterwards, hey, is there anything that the Chiefs did to start taking away the targets to you? And he said, no, it's us. It's an us thing. It's not another team thing. So I don't know what like the secret sauce is. And all I could think of is maybe in this bye week, Bo Hardegree, who's the interim offensive coordinator, maybe now he's had an opportunity to get back and kind of look at the film and see what works, see what Aiden O'Connell does really well. Because when they all took over as interims, Antonio Pierce, the interim head coach, Bo Hardegree, the interim offensive coordinator, they had like 4 days to prepare for the Giants. Now, luckily, it was the Giants that they had to prepare for, but it's not like they had a chance to breathe and understand the assignment and figure out what the job was and, kind of go through everything, see what works and what doesn't work. I mean, they literally hit the ground running and said, okay, we've got to figure this out for this game on Sunday. And they did. They won. And then they won the next week against the Jets. Now they've lost 2 in a row to Miami and Kansas City, obviously 2 better teams in the NFL. So I want to see what this bye week looks like. What did the bye week do for them? Besides help some of the players come back healthy, how are they going to try to help this offense go? We know that Josh Jacobs wants to get the ball 20 times. He wants to, 20 plus touches when he gets them. Usually the Raiders win, but it can't just be the Josh Jacobs show. They've got to be able to use these other weapons. So I'm interested to see what it looks like, and we won't know until Sunday.
Yeah, the Vikings have gotten fairly healthy too. They got TJ Hawkinson, who has been dealing with a rib injury for like 3 weeks. He's off the injury report, so as past it as you're going to get. Caleb Evans, who's missed a couple games with a calf injury. He was a full participant. Obviously, Justin Jefferson. So the Vikings have been in the last couple games, these L's that they've taken, just devastated with, at all levels. So we'll have to see. But they actually have had reasonable continuity on the offensive line. They lost Ezra Cleveland for a couple of weeks and then ended up replacing him with Dalton Risner, trading Cleveland at the deadline. But on the other side of that line is Brian O'Neill. And from what I understand, Max Crosby rushes the right tackle most often. So that's going to be the draw.
Around. He has been flipping around.
I think he'll stay because
they've been moving him around. So there's that.
My guess is that they'll keep him on the right tackle because the perception is that Darisaw is the left tackle. Darisaw is a superstar left tackle. So they'll probably want to put Crosby on the right side.
Right.
And rush him against not to speak any ill of Brian O'Neill, who's made a Pro Bowl. He's fantastic on his own right as well. But I'm going to guess that the perception for most teams has been he's the lesser one that draws the superstar. So my guess is Max Crosby over there on Brian O'Neill, who is a prototypical tackle. He's really good. He came out in the same class as Colton Miller and has been similar in trajectory to Colton Miller, where he came out super raw and he's just kind of gotten better and better and better while still having some hiccups here and there. But tell me about Max Crosby and the nature of the challenge that he poses to an offensive tackle.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I don't think anyone that has and gives as much effort as Max Crosby. Now, I'll tell you, he's got a knee injury. He's been He didn't participate in practice on Wednesday. He played last time they were out against Kansas City after not practicing all week, and he was doubtful as well. And his knee was so swollen; it had bacteria in it. Like, there's no reason why he should have been out there except for
Oh,
Max Crosby. Yeah, exactly. It's Max. Just Google it. Google Max Crosby and bacteria in the knee, and you'll
oh my
understand
God,
what
I'm doing
I'm
it right
talking
now.
about. It was gross, right? It was something that he should have definitely not been out there playing. But going up against Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes, he definitely wanted to be out there. So, and he recorded a sack. I mean, that just shows you who he is. I'm expecting that he's going to play, but I also expect the team to try to protect him from himself if it's still bad, right? Again, he didn't participate at all in practice on Wednesday, so something to pay attention to. But man, as far as effort and want to, and I mean, for the longest time, he was playing every snap of every single game. He wasn't coming off the field. He even got mad in that game against Kansas City when it was obviously over. It was the end of the game, and they pulled him out. And he's like, "No, I still want to be out here." He threw his helmet. I mean, that's just who he is. He says it himself. He's a maniac, and that's the best way to describe him. He's literally a maniac on the field. You love to have him, but at some point, you got to kind of protect him from himself as well. So we'll see and monitor that knee injury because right now it's similar to the Vikings. Like, Danielle Hunter is their guy as far as getting to the quarterback. For the Raiders, Max Crosby is their guy. Without him, their pass rush is almost non-existent.
Interesting. So yeah, there might be a plan of just, chip him all day, double him all day, just kind of make somebody else beat you on that line. If for a motor guy, this is a great opportunity because of the way Josh Dobbs plays quarterback. Especially when he is in the pocket and he doesn't like what's going on. Either he feels pressure, he doesn't like the read. His first instinct is to run backwards, and it becomes a pursuit game.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know. You got anybody who's good at pursuit?
Right. Exactly.
So it'd be a big opportunity. He would be very sorely missed if he doesn't play. I think that's a real big key to this one. And we should talk about all of the keys to victory, make some predictions if you are into that as well, and try to see if we can't suss out what this game's going to come down to.
So there's part 2 of the crossover edition right there. Luke, Braun, and myself talking all things Vikings and Raiders, biggest matchups. Coming in segment number 3, we're going to talk about what is it going to take for victories for both teams. Are we going to give a score prediction? We just might. You got to stick around for that. That's coming up in segment number 3. We'll get right to that after I tell you about Skylight Frames. And what is Skylight Frames? Well, it's the holiday season, right? So you're probably looking for a meaningful gift this season that your loved ones will actually use. And I'm not talking about socks, candles, slippers, robes, the traditional, I don't know what to buy, let me go ahead and get that. No, Skylight Frames is what you need. It's a touchscreen photo frame you can send photos to straight from your phone, and they appear in seconds, just like that. You can even preload photos before the box is open. So it's when it's unwrapped and plugged in, boom, your most treasured memories will appear. It's a perfect gift for everyone. Grandparents, new parents, your spouse, your kids, whatever the case may be. Skylight Frame is like a baby book or time capsule that will save and beautifully display each and every special moment. Again, whether it's your parents, your grandparents, your kids, whatever the case may be, their friends, it's a perfect gift for just about everyone. You can invite multiple friends and family members to share photos to the same frame. Effortlessly send photos from photo to photo frame with the free Skylight app or unique email. It's so easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. Less than it takes me to read this ad. You could already be done. Touchscreen makes it easy. Swipe through photos, tap to see new photos when they're sent, and tap the heart display if you like it. As a special limited time offer for all Locked On Raider podcast listeners, get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/lockedon to get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame. Again, go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. That's Skylight Frame, SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/lockedon. Skylight Frame/lockedon. Get $15 off a Skylight Frame at skylightframe.com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into part 3 of the crossover edition. Part 3 of the conversation between myself and Luke Braun as we talk all things Vikings and Raiders. And we're going to talk about what is it going to take for the Vikings to win? What is it going to take for the Raiders to come away with the victory and snap their 2-game losing streak? So let's go ahead and jump right into part 3 of our conversation. Luke Braun and myself talking all things Vikings and Raiders.
Keeping it rolling with this crossover Thursday episode of the Locked On Vikings and Locked On Raiders podcast, brought to you by PrizePicks. Q, what does this game come down to you? Well, we can do predictions if you want, but what is the I'll say key to the game, I guess. But I mean, what's the deciding factor here?
Well, the deciding factor for the Raiders, I'll give you one on both sides of the ball. For the offensive side of things, they've got to be able to play consistent. They always start off the game really hot. The offense goes down the field. They make some things happen. They don't always score touchdowns on the first drive, but it seems like early in the game they're playing pretty good offense, and then somehow it just kind of goes away. They've been inconsistent all year offensively. They've only scored over 20 points one time offensively. That was against the Giants. That was the first week that Antonio Pierce took over as the interim head coach. Besides that, it's all been under 20 points. They average about 16 points a game. And with the Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs, I don't understand how that's possible. I really don't. Like, it's been the $100 million question. I say $100 million because that's how much money is invested on the offensive side of things. And they can't score over 20 points. So they've got to consistently be able to get up and down the field and get into the end zone as opposed to just settling for field goals from Daniel Carlson, who one time was a Minnesota Viking, as you very well
he was. We're keenly aware of Daniel Carlson's career.
Man, he has been cash money for the Raiders. I'll tell you that. He has been such a blessing for the team. But I don't want to see him out there all the time. And they don't either. They don't want to see him out there kicking field goals. He needs to be kicking extra points. But that's not the case. And so the biggest key for the Raiders is, can their offense roll consistently? Can they consistently get up and down the field, and can they punch it in and get some touchdowns and not go 2 quarters without picking up a first down? And that's happened, right? It's been, okay, the first quarter is great. Then the second, third quarter, no first downs. Oh, then they get a first down in the fourth quarter when they're already down 14 points and they're trying to come back from behind. So they've got to be consistent offensively. And then defensively, I think that they have to take advantage of the Vikings' Achilles heels, which all season long, as you mentioned, has been turnovers. If they can create a couple turnovers, give them an opportunity. And what's the best recipe and really what helps out a struggling offense? A short field. So if they can come up with a couple turnovers and give the offense a short field, maybe they could take advantage and get some points off turnover and help get over 20 points. But getting that 20-point mark, man, has been so difficult. So I just look at it defensively. You got to create some turnovers. Offensively, you've got to have a rhythmic offense throughout the course of the whole game, not the first and the fourth quarter. Got to be somewhat consistent. You might not score every drive. I get that, but it's got to look better, more consistent throughout the course of the game to give themselves a chance in this one. What about the Vikings?
Playmakers make plays, right? You nailed it with the turnovers. The Vikings have turned the ball over on the first possession. I'm going off the dome here, 4 or 5 times this year. The first possession is specifically like it's disgusting. The fumbling and the interceptions and stuff. So I would say if the Vikings can get through like the first quarter or kind of up to the waning parts of the second quarter, like the first 2 or 3 drives, I'll say, without having a catastrophic turnover, then we've got something cooking here.
Right.
But the Vikings have so often dug themselves a hole by, first play against the Kansas City Chiefs, first play from scrimmage, turnover. And that isn't the only time that has happened. Wow. I think that happened against the Eagles as well. And those are those are the teams you're turning it over against too, right? Like there's no margin for error and you're just puking the game away. I've been incensed about it on Locked On Vikings. And I sound like a broken record because I say it every day on this show, but if you don't turn the ball over, you will win. That has been the story for the Vikings. You can cleanly divide their wins and losses based on the turnover ratio. So that means you have to play it a little bit safer. Getting Justin Jefferson back will help that as well, because you can, throw a spot route and maybe he makes something happen. Or you can throw a jump ball one-on-one and that ball is a little bit safer by virtue of being to Justin Jefferson, who's great at those situations. Defensively, knowing where Devontae Adams is on the field at all times is going to be a big one. But the way that they cover, a key for the Raiders, I guess, I'll say on this side of the ball, is if Aiden O'Connell can quickly look off linebackers, flip his hips and feet, and throw the other direction. Yeah. That is the way that I think you will find the most space against the Vikings defense when they are blitzing you, because a lot of times when they blitz, the linebackers will relate to the QB eyes. And so if you can manipulate the linebackers that way, but also get yourself set up to throw an accurate pass against that grain that you've created, you can find space. It's really difficult to do. I mean, Patrick Mahomes couldn't do it consistently against the Vikings. Right. Really, really, really tough quarterbacking. But if you can do that and keep that timing low, then you can find space. You can get the ball in Devontae Adams' hands or Josh Jacobs or Renfro's or whoever you want. But it is going to come down to, do those blitzes get home? Or, can you force Aiden O'Connell to go into improv mode and hope you can have him make some young guy mistakes?
Right.
That's what I think the Vikings are always hoping for. And that's what this always comes down to. Can you answer the blitz? Can you turn the ball over? If you can say yes to both those two things, you get to beat the Vikings.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I remember going back to the very first game of the season. The turnovers is what cost them. I think it was the first 3 or 4 games where the turnovers cost them. And they were 1-score games, right? I mean, they're too close.
Yeah,
and they're,
always.
they're a good team.
That's the other thing. I gotta say it on every crossover. Don't touch that dial. Every time. Do not touch that. I don't care if it's a 3-score lead at halftime. It was 24-3 against the Saints. They made a game out of that. Right. They were down by 17 points. They'll make a game out of it. They'll make the comeback. It's witchcraft. The Vikings have an uncanny ability to turn every game into a 1-score game. Even games that are, a 16-point game with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, you'll still get like a touchdown and a 2 and need a Hail Mary, and there's something to watch. So don't touch. If the Raiders are behind by 3 scores in the second quarter, I implore you, keep watching. You are not out of it, and vice versa.
Wow. Well, that's something, man. That's interesting. And, another thing for the Raiders is they're going to have to be able to run the rock with Josh Jacobs. He's got to be heavily involved. I don't know if they're going to try to pass to set up the run or run to set up the pass. A lot of times it's try to feed him, but he's got to be heavily involved one way or the other, right? I mean, it's statistically shown that when he has about 20, 21, 22 touches, the Raiders win games. So he's got to get involved. But I also look at it like you can't just give it to him and think he's going to run into the back of his offensive lineman, and then that's going to make him win just because he has more touches. They've got to be effective runs or effective catches out of the backfield. So you got to
those short fields, stay ahead of the chains.
Exactly. Yeah, this is not a team that's meant for a 3rd and long. Let's put it like that. 2nd and 10, 3rd and long. That's not a team. They really need to stay ahead of the chains the best that they can. So you don't want to see those negative runs, but sometimes he has them. But then every once in a while, he's able to break a big one like he did against Kansas City. He went for 63 yards and a touchdown. So Josh Jacobs is still the engine that makes everything go. They just got to figure out how to use him so he can consistently be effective in the offense.
So if I may indulge here at the end of this show, instead of going with score predictions or whatever, Vikings fans have a more burning question for you, I think, which is, what is the situation after the season with Josh Jacobs? The Vikings have a glaring need at running back.
Oh,
if people hit free agency, the Vikings will be bidding on him. So we got to know what's the deal there? He's got that 1-year deal that he signed, right? Is he going to hit free agency? Are the Raiders going to try to keep him in house? How's that going?
That's a great question, and I hate that I don't have an answer, but I don't, right? Because they have an interim GM, they have an interim head coach, they have an interim offensive coordinator, and he's got a 1-year deal, right? And I know that he's frustrated. I know he was frustrated
right.
when Josh McDaniels was still the head coach. I know he feels better about the situation with Antonio Pierce there, but I don't know who's going to be the head coach after the season. Is it going to be AP? Is Champ Kelly going to still be the GM? So again, this
could be Brian Flores.
I mean, you just never know. You never know who's going to be in position. So that's the thing. It's like the Raiders have 5 games, including this one on Sunday against Minnesota, to show what they all could do. Is Josh Jacobs worth bringing back? I mean, it was $12 million basically that they're paying this year. He's going to want a multi-year deal. He's not going to want to play on a franchise tag again. He already held out once for that, right? I mean, is he worth bringing back? Is whoever the coach is going to want to bring him back? Yeah, there's so many. Is Aiden O'Connell going to be the quarterback? Who's the GM? I mean, it's every day, brother. It's an adventure because we just don't know, right?
That means the future can be anything, right?
So
there's a fun in that.
So to answer your question, I guess the best way I can, there's a chance that he's a free agent next year. They're in the offseason. Maybe he is a free agent. Maybe they franchise him and try to trade him, or maybe they try to sign him to a long-term deal. I heard that it was close right when the deadline hit, but they weren't able to get it done. It wasn't a whole lot of money that they were separate from, but guess what? Those guys are gone. So now what's the new guy's going to do? If it's Champ Kelly, he's already at least familiar with the situation, so maybe he can get it done. But if it's someone completely different, do they value a running back at that position? We all know how people feel and teams feel about running backs these days. Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Can't wait to watch it shake out. Can't wait to check out a little bit of Locked On Raiders this week. I always encourage Vikings fans to go check out the opposition. And Raiders fans, you are, of course, welcome to come hang with me this week as well. For your boy Q at Locked On Raiders, I am Luke Braun at Locked On Vikings, signing off on Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network.
So there it is. There it was. That was part 3 of the conversation and the whole thing. Done deal. Crossover Thursday. It's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I know it's a lot of people's favorite shows of the week just because you get a little bit of insight and a little bit of background on the team that your favorite team is about to play. In this case, it's the Raiders hosting the Vikings at Allegiant Stadium. Looking forward to being back in the building after being a week away from for the bye week for the Silver and Black. And so it should be a lot of fun seeing the Minnesota Vikings come to town and see what the Raiders can do with them. Josh Dobbs is the quarterback for the Vikings, so see if the Raiders can turn him over. If they could turn him over a couple times, I could definitely see them coming away with a victory come Sunday. But hopefully you enjoyed the crossover edition. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and notes. We'll have more calls and texts. We'll get back to that in segment number 3 on the Locked On Raiders podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We'll continue to monitor the injury report, see if Max Crosby and Colton Miller or if they participate in practice today or not, and give you the updates as it goes. And, of course, we'll close out the week really strong. Keys to victory. What do I believe it's going to take for the Silver and Black to come away with the W? Again, want to send my thoughts and prayers and love and all my, again, prayers I could send to all the victims, all the families that were affected by what happened on Wednesday at campus of UNLV, where there was an active shooter. 3 victims, 3 folks lost their lives. Another person was in the hospital. They were stable condition last I saw, so it sounds like that's trending in the right direction. But as I mentioned before, one life is too much, especially when you're talking about young people. So I say it all the time, and I mean it. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Love on your family. If your kid's about to leave the house, give them a hug. Tell them that you love them. Tell them that you mean it, because you just never know. And that's a shame that I have to say that, but that's what it is these days. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Love on your family. Until then, just win, baby.